Son Excellence, Monsieur Albert Mabry, ministre des Affaires étrangères de la République de la Côte d'Ivoire, Son Excellence, Madame Kaba, ministre du Plan de développement de la République de la Côte d'Ivoire, Son Excellence, Monseigneur Joseph Spiteri, nonce apostolique doyen du corps diplomatique, Excellences, Mesdames et Messieurs les ambassadeurs, Mesdames, Messieurs les représentants des organisations internationales accréditées en République de Côte d'Ivoire, Mesdames, Messieurs les administrateurs de groupe de la Banque africaine de développement, Mesdames et Messieurs les membres de haute direction de la Banque africaine de développement. Excellences, Mesdames et Messieurs, je vous remercie d'avoir accepté l'invitation que nous avons adressée de vous joindre à nous pour cette rencontre annuelle. C'est une tradition qui nous tient au corps au groupe de Banque africaine de développement. Au début de chaque nouvelle année, nous invitons la communauté diplomatique et les institutions internationales à déjeuner. Au moment où nous avons souhaité nos meilleurs vœux de nouvelle année, nouvel an, l'occasion nous est offerte à nous tous de parler de l'Afrique et de la Banque africaine de développement. La tradition veut que nous procédions à un échange de vues après le déjeuner et y attendre avec intérêt tous nos commentaires, ainsi que ceux des membres de la presse qui sont ici avec nous aujourd'hui. Cette journée est très spéciale pour moi, car c'est le premier déjeuner annuel auquel je participe en tant que président de la Banque africaine de développement depuis ma prise de fonction le 1er septembre l'année passée. C'est donc avec grand plaisir que j'ai eu l'occasion de rencontrer certains d'entre vous depuis lors, et je souhaite que nos relations se renforcent en cette nouvelle année. Y a-t-il meilleur moment aujourd'hui pour rendre hommage à la Côte d'Ivoire, votre pays d'accueil et le pays d'accueil de la Banque africaine de développement? C'est avec grand plaisir que la Banque est revenue à la maison. En 2014, près de 1000 personnes se sont installées ici avant la fin de l'année. Nous avons été chaleureusement accueillis pendant 11 ans par le gouvernement et le peuple de la Tunisie. Nous leur sommes à jamais reconnaissants. Aujourd'hui, nous sommes revenus à Abidjan, le premier siège de la Banque africaine de développement. We are all very proud of Côte d'Ivoire, and for good reasons. It conducted peaceful and successful elections at the end of last year, and looks set to consolidate and accelerate its progress. The bank has been and will continue to be a major partner in that journey for our host nation. I hope that every time you speed across the beautiful Henri Konan-Bédier Bridge, you will spare a thought for the transformative power of what governments, the African Development Bank, and the private sector, and the people and the communities of a city can do together. And that image provides my theme of interacting with you today, Africa on the move. Africa in partnership with itself and with the outside world to quicken the pace and deepen the roots of its transformation. I plan to do 5 things in my address to you today. First, I would like to paint a picture of a resilient and dynamic Africa. Second, to paint a picture of a resilient and dynamic African Development Bank. And third, to look at Africa's remaining challenges. No one denies that they are huge challenges, and we all know that. Fourth, to say how we plan to meet them. Stand by for what I think is going to be a very interesting way of greeting each other at the end, and I'm glad the American ambassador is here. Fifth, to talk about the bonds between the people, the organizations, and the countries in this room. Quite simply, we cannot achieve economic and social transformation in Africa without you. You are already our greatest champions and advocates. And in 2016, as we replenish the African Development Fund, which gives concessional loans and grants to African poorer countries, we need you more than ever before. The good news for Africa. Excellencies, Africa is indeed resilient and dynamic. It has been growing, as you know, at rates of 5.6%, 5.8% for quite some time. And the factors that influence that are quite numerous. Part of it is political stability, as we've witnessed in our beautiful Côte d'Ivoire here, the strong macroeconomic and fiscal consolidation that we have in many of our countries, strong investment in public infrastructure, increased private consumption, good public governance, and of course trade. Of course, we still have to do quite a lot on trade with each other, but there's no doubt that trade has been a big component of what we have seen. Now, when you take all of this together, you will see that Africa is in a position to actually post what I call resilient growth and ability to resist shocks that we currently see in the global economy. It's a story we can all be proud of. Today, if you take a look at the great growth rates that are projected, well, Africa is still projected to grow at 4.4%. And all the developed countries are projected to grow together at about 0.2%. And Europe is going to grow about 1.9%. And so the point I want to make is a very simple one. Africa is not falling apart by any means. Africans' economies are very strong. They're very resilient. Yes, you have economic headwinds, but so does the rest of the world. And if you look at how Africa is projected to actually come out of that down the line, projections thus tell us that by 2017, growth is going to be about 5%. So yes, Africa has some challenges. I think they are overplayed sometimes, in my view. But African economies are not unraveling. They are resilient. Let us turn to the African Development Bank. Excellencies, as Africa is resilient, so is the African Development Bank. Despite what might have been the potential for uncertainty as it settled into its new home here last year, we exceeded our lending targets by a full 120%. This figure takes account of the 160% achievement on our public sector lending, coupled with 100% achievement of our private sector lending. We also reached 90% of our ADF financing target for the year. I know I'm the president of the bank, and I can read all these figures to you, but if you can just simply join me and thank our staff and our board of directors for making that happen, I'll appreciate that. Overall, loans and grants in the year for the entire bank group accounted for $9 billion, up from $7.1 billion in 2014, a 26% increase. The African Development Bank, the ADB, accounted for 85% of that, something which is in part explained by the way we just simply opened up the ADB so that we have a new credit policy that countries can graduate from being simply ADF-only countries, but they can move to being an ADB, but also borrow from the ADB. Over 50% of the bank's group's 2015 approvals went to infrastructure, of which 30% went to transport and 15% to energy projects. I am delighted to say that the bank's AAA credit status was reaffirmed at the end of last year by all rating agencies. They cited our intrinsic financial health, our prudent financial management, our sound liquidity policies, and our very strong shareholder support. And you are our shareholders that are here, and you represent your capitals here. As a result of such strong rating, the bank has been and will be able to borrow from the capital market at more competitive terms. The benefits, obviously, of that low rate of borrowing is passed on to the countries. Your countries are the African countries that we serve, the regional member countries. I'm particularly delighted to also let you know that we worked on this multilateral development bank risk exposure exchange facility. And this regional exchange facility, and Tim is here that worked a lot with the folks, our group chief risk officer. It's a phenomenal instrument which was actually approved by our board of directors. It allows us to have a headroom freed up of about $10 billion additional, could be up to that, which allows us to be able to lend more for infrastructure, for energy, for roads, for water, for sanitation, all the things that you saw in the beautiful video that we were able to show you today. It also allows us to be able to reduce the risk of exposure that we had a bit more concentration in North Africa when we started. That will actually reduce that significantly for us. So it makes us less exposed, more resilient, but we can do a lot more as well. So I want you to know, Your Excellencies, that you personally, but also your countries, are backing the right horses. You're backing an Africa that is growing and resilient in spite of the shocks. We are also backing a very resilient African Development Bank that is very creative, innovative in making things happen for Africa. Your Excellencies, sometimes when I look at the stories that we see in the media, I sometimes wonder. You know, people write stories, and yes, the commodity prices have fallen. We know that. We know that there's a lot of volatility. Yes, we know that. But sometimes if you look at the projections that we have, yes, Africa will grow at 4.4% globally. But if you take, for example, the distribution of that growth, you take a look, for example, at East Africa. The African Development Bank Group estimates that that region will grow about 6.4%. If you take a look at it in terms of Central Africa, about 5.5%. You take a look at North Africa, yes, maybe about 3.4, 3.5%. Southern Africa will still grow about 3.6%. And West Africa here, maybe about another close to 5%. So we can see that across all the regions where we serve, Africa remains quite resilient in the face of global economic shocks. So of course, we as a bank will continue to do what we do best, which is to support them with knowledge functions, to have greater macroeconomic stability. Fiscal consolidation is crucial, but also to support them with counter-cyclical support, finance, and also balance of payment support that we can do for them. We will continue to do that. But for now, let me turn to how we respond as a bank to many of the challenges that we face today. I don't know if ambassadors from either Guinea, Liberia, or Sierra Leone are here. Now, but we as a bank are very proud of those countries. They were showing very good economic growth rates until the Ebola situation happened. But I think the fact that those countries can come out of the Ebola situation and still continue to grow the way they are, I think it's a mark of resilience that I'm talking about concerning Africa's economies. And we're proud of the role that we played and that others also played in that issue. So there is yet much to be done. And we must have high aspirations for Africa. We cannot and we should never have low aspirations for Africa. That's why as the African Development Bank, we are now accelerating the pace of our delivery of our 10-year strategy by focusing on what we call the high fives. The high fives are what we call light up and power Africa, to feed Africa, to industrialize Africa, to integrate Africa, and to improve the quality of life for Africans. I just came back from the African Union last week, where I had the opportunity and the privilege and honor of addressing the African heads of state, the NEPAD heads of state, on development. And there was massive endorsement, unanimous endorsement of the high fives. And one of the presidents said, if all the African countries simply did these 5 things and we got them done at scale, Africa would be totally a different continent. So I feel very convinced, so are my colleagues, that we're on the right track. Let me just say a few words about this. I thought I asked for something about energy to be put here for me, but I don't see that. Let's take the issue of light up and power Africa. Ladies and gentlemen, I was talking to the ambassador from the Doyen, Monseigneur, and also Madame the Minister from Ivory Coast, and also Madame Ambassador from DRC. Je leur avais dit que, bon, on ne peut pas continuer à avoir les discussions dans l'obscurité quand même. Ce n'est pas possible. Nous avons aujourd'hui environ 645 millions des Africains qui n'ont pas accès à l'électricité. 700 millions des Africains qui n'ont pas accès à l'énergie propre pour faire les choses simples, comme la cuisine, faire la cuisine. 600 000 Africains morts chaque année parce qu'ils n'ont pas accès à ça. Et ce qu'ils font simplement, c'est simplement préparer la cuisine. Ce n'est pas possible quand même. C'est la raison pour laquelle les banques africaines de développement avaient développé ce que nous appelons le New Deal pour l'énergie en Afrique. Et ce New Deal en énergie pour l'Afrique avait un but très clair pour pouvoir accélérer l'accès à l'énergie électrique universelle en Afrique d'ici dans 10 ans. J'avais eu l'occasion de discuter avec beaucoup de personnes sur ça. On a déjà développé les choses. On va passer par notre board, l'administration, les conseillers, pour avoir l'approbation nécessaire pour faire ça. Mais en tant que banque, on est clair. Il faut éclairer l'Afrique. Parce que sans ça, il n'y aura pas aucune industrialisation. Il n'y a pas le PME, de petites et moyennes entreprises ne vont pas marcher. On ne va pas créer les emplois. Et il y aura toujours les migrations. Nous parlons de migration. Et j'ai l'habitude de dire, si vous voyez quelque chose qui est noir, une partie sombre, et vous voyez quelques plaques où il y a la lumière, même les insectes, ils font les migrations où il n'y a pas l'électricité. C'est comme ça, même les insectes. Ce n'est pas quelque chose. C'est pour laquelle nous avons dit que ce New Deal, nous avons fait un partenariat transformatif sur ça, mais ça c'est très important pour nous. We also have what we call Feed Africa, which is basically with this clear goal of making Africa to process what it produces. 65% of all the land in the world, available land to feed 9 billion people in 2050, it's in Africa. With regard to, in Ivory Coast, we have to process our cashew. The President, Monsieur le Président en Côte d'Ivoire m'avait dit ça. Il faut faire la valeur ajoutée pour le noix de cajou. Il m'avait dit, c'est très important aussi de faire la valeur ajoutée, même pour le cacao. La transformation, le chocolat. Je sais que vous aimez le chocolat, mais moi, j'aimerais que le chocolat aussi soit produit en Afrique, n'est-ce pas? Parce que c'est nous qui produisons le cacao quand même. Et il parlait concernant l'industrialisation, ce qui est aussi très important, parce que sans l'industrialisation, il ne peut pas avoir la création de l'emploi et toutes ces choses comme ça. Intégration régionale, c'est très fondamental, parce que c'est la raison d'être même de la Banque africaine de développement. Investissement de l'infrastructure dans les ports, dans les routes transnationales, comme ça, c'est très, très important. Énergie régionale, nous avons parlé avec Madame l'ambassadeur de RDC concernant les grands Inga. Il faut débloquer cette potentialité-là. Finalement, il y a d'améliorer la qualité de vie des Africains au niveau de la compétence, au niveau de l'éducation, au niveau de l'approvisionnement en eau, au niveau de l'assainissement, au niveau de la santé. C'est très important quand même d'avoir ça pour l'Afrique. Ce sont les 5 choses dont nous parlons. So, the African Development Fund, which aims to eradicate extreme poverty by promoting social and economic development and regional integration. We're soon going to have our replenishment, as you look at during that video. The African Development Fund has disbursed over $40 billion since its existence, with some 40 countries receiving concessional loans and grants. We estimate in the last 10 years, through the work of the bank and the fund, that 14 million Africans have benefited from new and improved access to water and sanitation. We've supplied 280,000 cubic meters of water per day. 19 million Africans have benefited from new electricity connections. We've generated an extra 2,500 megawatts of electricity, but we believe that in the next 10 years, what Africa needs is for us to be able to generate for Africa much more than that. We need 160 gigawatts of electricity to light up, to ensure that we can have clean cooking, but also to make sure we can industrialize Africa. I won't go through all of the statistics because I think you have actually listened to much of that inside of the video that you looked at. So, ladies and gentlemen, next month we will gather here for the first meeting of the 14th replenishment of the African Development Fund. We are the first to acknowledge that things are hard in the donor countries. But we also thank you because you have confidence in this bank. And you have confidence in Africa that we can use the resources well to allow Africa to meet what is crucially the sustainable development goals for this continent. We are the bank that's going to help Africa to get there. But you are the partners to help us, to help African countries to be able to do that. So as I close, Your Excellencies, let me say that you are the representatives that we count on. Wherever you go, whosoever you meet, we urge you to be champions for the African Development Bank. I would like to simply repeat a few things as I close. That Africa, again, is resilient and dynamic is the place to be. That the African Development Bank is doing a great job, is resilient and is dynamic, and it should be greatly supported. And that despite the challenges that Africa faces, as we invest in all those critical 5 things that I mentioned, to light up and power Africa, to feed Africa, to industrialize Africa, to integrate Africa, and to improve the quality of life for Africa, Africa will be a totally different place. And I'm sure that with all of your support for the ADF, will help the ADF countries to be able to achieve that. So I would like you to please turn to the person next to you and do what I was saying the American ambassador was very happy to do. Just give the person next to you a high five. Just give them a high five this way. Yeah. That's right. That's very good. High five for Africa, and we thank you very much.